Hello.
Hello.
Hey guys. Can everyone hear me okay?
Oh yeah, perfectly, yeah.
Absolutely, sir.
Thanks for coming.
Excellent. Oh, pleasure.
Who wants to start?
Wow.
How's your day been? You had a good day so far?
Yeah. It's a beautiful day here where I live, and basically just spent the day writing, but that's what I do, so that's okay.
I'm gonna gush for about 10 seconds and then I'll stop. But wow, thank you, Jay.
Oh, my pleasure.
This is beyond cool to me. So, all right, guys, you can take over. I just had to gush for a minute.
So, do you want to talk about your most recent project, or want to talk about go into a bit of history first?
Whatever you want to do, I'll roll with it. How's that?
All right.
So perfect.
Okay. How did
we
you get
wrap
started?
up with the new stuff and let's just talk.
Okay.
Stuff. So, I would hog everything if I get to talk, and everybody knows that. So I'm gonna deflect to Mark up in the corner, WM up there. If you haven't noticed, we did a little homage with our names here. The guys thought,
That's very funny.
We have a Silver Knight Kyle or whatever, so we all initialed it for you here to join right in. But
that's great.
I'm going to hit you up with some old questions, some of which I already have answers to from talking to you over the years. And then, of course, I'm going to bend your ear about the Defenders. But Mark's got some questions going for you, and I'm going to sit back and just enjoy the ride for a few.
I'm going to ask I've got some questions about some old stuff, and I've got some questions about the new stuff as well. So I'm going to start.
That works perfectly. So the problem sometimes is that people want to talk about my career, and they start like in 1980.
Yeah,
and an hour goes by and we're at 1982.
Yeah, I did see an interview like that where you said, "Look, if this carries on, we're going to be here 5 hours."
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with the new stuff because it's.
We go back to 1980.
Wow.
Yeah, he said Kyle showed this book and he said, "This is JM's first work." I said, "It's a coloring book. It can't have been that difficult to write."
I wrote it in a night. and let me tell you something. I was thrilled to have the work.
Yeah.
I think it was the first Batman story I ever wrote. Paul Levitz, who also edited that story.
Kyle said it hit his educational level. So
All right, let's hear your question.
Okay, sorry. So that you're starting a new comic book line at the age. Well, you're 5 years older than me, and I've retired. So that's pretty impressive. So what drives you to do that?
What drives me to do this specifically, or what drives me to keep going, period?
Well, both, I think.
Yeah, both.
Well, all right. I'll give you the general answer first, and then we'll zero in on the Kickstarter specifically. The Kickstarter, by the way, ends tomorrow at noon.
It does.
So anyone out there that hasn't come along to join us, this is the last gasp. So come on, help us get over the finish line here. Well, we actually crossed our initial finish line the first day in 6 hours.
Yeah.
But because we have a whole line of books that we want to continue, the more the merrier. Let's put it that way.
The link is down below.
So, thank you. So, why do I keep going? Because I'm a writer, and I people pay me to make things up. And if they didn't pay me, I'd still be laying around making up stories anyway.
Yeah.
Happily, they still pay me. And I keep writing because I love it, basically. That's really what it comes down to. I just love it. It's the same. I always say it's the same thing as when you're a little kid. When I was a kid, I spent a good part of my childhood laying on the floor, drawing pictures, or making my own comic books and stapling together, or writing short stories, or playing the guitar and writing songs. It's just, if you're creative, that's what you do. Yeah. And why would you stop?
I saw an interview with John Buscema, and he said exactly the same thing about drawing. He just says, "I'll draw. It doesn't matter if anybody's not paying me. I'll just draw what I want to draw."
Yeah, and the truth is, when I'm in the middle of a story, when I'm working and my brain is totally engaged in that story, I'm not thinking about, when am I getting paid for this story, or when is it going to be published, or will anyone publish? All you're thinking about is the magic of that interaction with the story. Yeah. And so you keep doing it.
Yeah.
I got to give you one more kudos while I'm leaning back here, because it's gnawing at my head, and I'm a writer too. But a writer writes, but an extraordinary writer writes extraordinarily, and you, sir, extraordinary. So
bless you, my son.
I kid you not. I mean, this is a Mount Olympus moment for me because I don't get starstruck. I rub elbows with presidents and rock stars and all kind of things like that. And my list of people who profoundly affected me, I actually have done a story on the channel here about how this issue profoundly affected me since 1980.
Wow.
So anybody wants to go back and look at that, including you, I've talked about how this issue in itself profoundly affected me when I was 13. And I can never thank you enough. And I probably thanked you 1,000 times through links and on things over the years. But this is extraordinary. And this is when they handed you the book.
Yeah, that was my first issue.
And it's extraordinary. I mean, this puts so many other writers to shame. And you're an up and comer when it happened. So no wonder I've been a fan for so long.
Wow.
And I'm going to back out with mine.
Okay. I just want to say before we get off that one, I can't look at my early work objectively. So often when I look at it, all I see is how far I had to go to get where I needed to be. I see the flaws jump out at me. So that you can look at that story, which is like, my first issue of the Defenders. I just started at Marvel, and then if that story had such an impact and still does, that's a great thing. So thank you.
I mean, it's a 6-issue run. They kind of had the ideas seeded and whatever like that, and plots and whatever. But this is part of a 6-issue story. But this is still a standalone book that to date I still recommend to people. I'm like, even if you don't finish the rest of the story, this is a standalone tome. I put this up with Dante.
Kyle, ask a question, mate. Ask a question.
So I've asked all the questions.
Okay,
that's just me saying.
Well, I thank you for
everybody. That. And this was 42 years ago, and he's still that good of a writer. That's why I say extraordinary. Because if you could do this 42 years ago, and affect me as a 32-year-old kid, and you still do it. I'm not just here to sing your praises. I'm here to say, buy these books. Invest.
If you don't ask a question, I'm going to mute you, mate. Seriously. We're
going back to Mark. But
right.
So it happened. That happened right there. So
the Kickstarter, which I as you say, it's got about 24. I went onto it yesterday. Actually,
right.
I did sign up because I wanted.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Because there was an offer for Tom Mandrake free sketch. Oh, not free sketch, but if you
as a bonus,
one of the rewards. So I signed up for that. So
that's
I
great.
would say to anybody, go now because it's going to close shortly, and there's some great offers on there.
Yeah, noon tomorrow. In fact, one of the things someone canceled, so we've brought this reward back. You get to talk to me on 25 minutes on Zoom, one-on-one. So that's one of the rewards. You guys don't have to do that because you have. Anyway, let's talk about the Kickstarter.
Yeah, can find out more about the. I've got a little picture here.
So your question is why? Why are we doing it?
Yeah.
And it goes in with the other question that I just answered. I'm always developing original ideas. And going back to the 80s, I was always bouncing back and forth between the Marvel and DC characters and original material, starting with Moonshadow at Epic back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always developing ideas. I'm always looking for new venues for these ideas. And one of the things that always fascinated me was Kickstarter. And because I love the fact that it's reaching the audience directly. There's no wall between you and the audience. You go on the ride with them, they go on the ride with you. And it's really fascinating to me. The problem that I always saw was not the creative work, but all the other work that goes into preparing, running, maintaining that Kickstarter. Just thinking about it was exhausting.
Sure.
So I have a friend named David Baldy. He's a TV writer and a producer. And we got to talking one day and talking about Kickstarters. And he was like, well, I'll be your partner in this. I'll do the lifting over here. You do the lifting over there. We'll put ourselves together and we'll run this thing. And I thought, that's great. So we started talking about ideas. Well, like I said, I have a lot of ideas. So I pitched him 4 or 5 things right off the bat. And he said, well, why don't we do 4? Let's do 4 of them. So in my mind, we were gonna pick one and do like a 5-issue miniseries, kickstart that, put that out. David's idea was, and it's a very TV idea, was to put out 4 pilots, 4 first issues, launching 4 new series in 4 different genres, 4 different styles, with 4 different artists who also work in different genres and styles. And that's what we ended up doing, and started half jokingly calling it the DeMatteis. And then the name kind of stuck. And we went, that's pretty cool. Let's call it that. So, and David then built this imprint, Spellbound Comics, around that. And I reached out to all these wonderful artists. We both did, and they came aboard. And the next thing we knew, I'm just swimming in all these new projects. And the exciting thing is to get them all out in the world at once. And then this past week, we threw in as a bonus a 5th project that I was working on the side anyway. And we thought, well, for everyone who came along, let's just throw that in. It's not going to be in the collected edition. It's just a special bonus. And so now we've got 5 new series, and it's really, really exciting. Really exciting. It's one of the most exciting things I've ever been involved in. Let me close
I think it's 5 times oversubscribed, which is great.
I'm sorry, say that again. I missed that.
Something like 4 or 5 times oversubscribed, which is great.
Yes. Well, we set the goal intentionally low in the beginning. We wanted to meet that, so anyone who came along on this ride knew once we hit that goal, you're getting your books. They're coming. It's not one of these things where you're going to be waiting years, or oh my God, you're not funded and you spent 30 days and they're waiting and there's no books. Yeah, these books are basically almost all done. When we're going to wrap up a couple of little things, proof the lettering, a couple of pages of coloring here and there, and that's it. They're all done. Then we just have to put the collected edition together. And then, however long it takes to go off across the world to the printer, because all these printers are like in Korea and stuff. And then hopefully by early spring, everyone will have their books.
Yeah. I know it's not cool to ask people what their favorite child is, but of those 5 new titles, what's your favorite of them? Which one which have you got?
Someone else asked me that, and and this is an honest answer. Whichever one I'm thinking about at the moment is my favorite, because I know all these are really, really big stories. I know where they're all going. So I'm not just looking at these first issues. I'm projecting ahead to all these epic stories that might be 2 or 3 5-issue minis by the time we're done telling these stories, So it's whichever one I'm working with at the moment, or whichever artwork I'm looking at, If it's, oh, look, this great Tom Mandrake artwork. Oh, this must be my favorite today. Oh, look at this great Sean McManus artwork. So we've got Sean McManus, Tom Mandrake, Matthew Dow Smith, David Baldion doing the art on the 4 main books. On the 5th bonus book of Vasilis Godzilos, who's a wonderful, wonderful artist that I've worked with before from Greece. I hope more people get to know him, because he's one of the most talented humans I've ever worked with. And then we've got Liam Sharp doing the cover for the collected edition. Liam, who he and I worked on Man-Thing together in the 90s, and he's just an extraordinary artist. And then for our alternate covers, we have Kevin McGuire. Let's see if I get this right. Dustin Yen, Kent Williams, and who am I forgetting? Dang, I know there's another one, and I'm drawing a blank. All right, Godsend is Kent Williams. Oh, J.H. Williams III. J.H. Williams III, extraordinary. His work
from
fantastic.
Yeah,
Promethea and so many other wonderful things. He's just one of my favorite artists. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Yeah. It's hard to contain all this in my head, especially after a month of this. It's like I have very few brain cells left, so I hope I make coherent sense.
Okay, can I just ask you a question? If this isn't private, I don't know how private, but how are you? I mean, so with the artists, are they coming on for a bit of royalty, or are you paying them a fee? Or
we are all, I'm not going to get into the behind the scenes business, but we are all considered co-creators on this. My philosophy is, doesn't matter if I've had an idea in my head for 20 years. This is a comic book. Until those pictures come alive on the page, it is not complete. And if I had 10 different artists coming toward the same project, it would look completely different with each of them. So each one of these artists is bringing so much through their visual interpretations of my stories that I can't separate the two. Doesn't matter how long I've had it in my head. Once we create the comic, we're partners, and that's the way it is going forward.
That's great. I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
You mentioned Liam Sharp there, and I'm acquainted with Liam Sharp, and he'll be on here one of these days soon when life slows down a little bit for him. And
fantastic artist.
Next week we got
guy.
Tom Mandrake because of you. I mean, I put the feeler out there, but my connection to get in touch with Tom Mandrake is sitting right here with us. So.
Have you got a favorite artist you've worked with over the years? The one
Oh, that's worse than that.
That's it. These favorite questions are really tough because if you look at the list of guys that I've worked with, I have worked with just this extraordinary array of incredible talent.
Yeah.
How do you choose? Just look at these guys that I just mentioned just for this one thing.
Yeah.
How do you pick one of them and say that guy's my favorite?
Then one of the other artists you worked with, my friend Hillary Varda, whose first professional inking job was on.
That's right, over Don Perlin on Defenders. That's
and true. Hillary was our first guest on the first show we did here because first favor I called in and opened worms and said, "Well, who do we want?" I was like, "Damn DeMatteis." So,
is there a thread connecting the 4 different series in your new multiverse?
Everybody thinks because it's comics that it's all interconnected, and it's not. It's a multiverse because it's 4 different series existing in 4 different universes, parallel universes. Not and I said, you know what? If these are the biggest success in history, and we go ahead and we continue to put this out there, well, I'm a writer. I could come up with a story that will get them all to cross over. but that's not the plan right now. The plan is to get these books out into the world and then continue them. And I have to mention something really, really important. Anyone that supports all 4 books, the 4 main books, or buys the collected edition, gets to vote on which of the 4 is the first that we will continue to full series. So that's another way to reach out to the audience and get them directly involved because they get to say, hey, this is what you're doing next, whether you like it or not,
Yeah.
But I'll like it. No matter what answer they come up with, I'm going to like it. So it's okay.
Cool. That's awesome.
And these come out with so if you subscribe to the Kickstarter, you'll get your comics in March, April next year.
Yeah, I would think, barring any problems with printing, paper shortages, or that stuff, I would think, let's say April. David Baldy, who's running the Spellbound arm of this thing, would have a clearer idea. But everything I'm hearing, we're talking about early spring.
So David is doing all the organizing the printers and all that.
Yes. That gets into the realm where my brain just, I always say I'm all right brain. I have no left brain whatsoever.
And so he's dealing with the distribution and all that.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it's really interesting. I think that's
exciting questions in the chat as well. Have you got any sort of memories from Craven's Last Hunt when you was working on that? How that came about? What was the gem of the idea that started rolling?
Sure. I'll answer this, and I want to just dial back and at least tell you a little bit about each of these series, but I'm happy to answer any. Cool. Craven, it's an interesting thing. I keep saying it's like, I create a story, or an artist and I create a story, and then we release it into the wild, and once it's released, it almost has nothing to do with us anymore, and the audience makes a choice about that story. I've had stories that I've really, really loved that I think, wow, this is some of the best work I've ever done. And it goes out and people don't notice it, or maybe they don't notice it. And I've literally seen this 10 years later, people start to go, oh, that was really good. And then other times something goes out there and it just clicks in a way that I can't fathom. And Craven's Last Hunt really was like that. One of those stories that just went out there. I'm very proud of the story, but I have to be honest. There are other stories that I've written that are just as good, I think, or a few that I think are even better. But Craven, there's some magical chemical reaction that happened between me and Mike Zeck and Bob McLeod and Spider-Man. And people just took that story into their hearts. And the amazing thing all these years later is that people are still discovering it for the first time. I go to a convention and someone walks up, or on Twitter, hey, I just read this last week for the first time. And they keep reprinting it over and over and over again and sending me checks. So that's very nice too,
Oh, yeah.
And if I want to focus on the best thing about it, is just working with Mike Zeck. Mike and I worked together he was on for, I guess, 2 of my 3-year run on Captain America. That's when we first and that was what really helped us with Craven, because we had 2 years to develop a creative chemistry and get to know each other. And once a writer and artist really get to know each other, you're not thinking about it the same way. It becomes intuitive, and you just start to understand each other. Mike is also, he's an incredible visual storyteller. In comics, as you guys I'm sure know, you can be the greatest artist in the world. You could be Van Gogh, but if you can't tell a story visually from panel to panel, it ain't the job for you. Doesn't matter how brilliant you are, and we've all seen comics where the visual storytelling is off, and the drawing may be just great, but something is just stiff and awkward, or the flow between panels.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, Mike draws incredibly well, but also his panel to panel visual storytelling. So I hand him, Craven was written plot first. So I write a very detailed plot, breaking the story down page by page. And then Mike draws it and I get the work back, and I dialogue it from his finished art. So with Mike, everything that I'm asking for in my plot, so much of it is right there in the drawings. Every emotion that I want, the clarity of action. Sometimes when you work in that fashion where it's plot first, you get art back, and I'm looking at it and I have no clue what's happening on the page, and I wrote it. So I have to write these, these anguished balloons that are explaining the, when you read a comic book and it's sort of like, oh, he pushed me and I'm falling off the roof, because somewhere along the line the artist didn't do his job, and the writer has to overcompensate with clunky dialogue to explain what's in the pictures. And I'm sure that artists have their list of complaints with writers too. So I'm not laying anything on artists. Just but when you're working with Mike, all the level one emotions are there. All the story is really, really clear. So if you read Craven's Last Hunt, 90% of that is all interior monologue. It's all getting in the characters' heads and going to level 2, 3, 4, 5, down in their psyches, because I don't have to explain what's going on in the pictures, because it's crystal clear. I don't have to say, oh, look, that character's angry, because it's right there on his face. Oh, look, Peter's afraid, or Mary Jane is worried. It's right there. I can drill into their heads and go deeper and deeper. If someone else had drawn that story, I might not have been able to do that. And that goes back to what I was saying before about the artist as the co-creator. Doesn't matter that I came up with the story.
I think that's absolutely right. I think all the great comics are where the artist and the writer are in sync, and you can feel it. They're producing a joint piece of art, and they're like that. And
it's like a mind meld that happens.
Yes.
Keith Giffen and I, our minds melded years ago, and I can't unstick them. And sometimes the opposite happens. I've seen stories where I think I've written a very good script. The artist has done a wonderful job with the art, and somehow when you put it together, it's flat. I don't know why. There's no explanation. It's just creative chemistry. That's all it is. It's just chemistry.
Do you want to talk about your multiverse again? You said you wanted to go over the characters.
Oh yeah, well, let's go. I'll just let's just go over. I'll give you a little bit about each of the stories, just so the people out the people out there know what it's about. Little teaser, yeah, exactly. So the first one is called Layla in the Lands of After. That's the one that's done by Sean McManus with an alternate cover by J.H. Williams III. The main character is Layla. She's a 13-year-old girl. She's biking home from her friend's house one chilly October night, a very Ray Bradbury kind of night. All the leaves are turning and the wind is blowing. And she's suddenly enveloped in this ball of light and carried up into the air and swept away to this extraordinary, wondrous, magical land that, is this Oz? Is this Wonderland? Is this Neverland? Well, she's just amazed until this cat comes trotting up to her, and she realizes that this is her cat who died like 5 years before. And then this old man appears, and she realizes that's her grandfather. He's dead too. And then they inform her, well, so are you, because that light that enveloped her was the light of the car that ran her down.
Oh, gosh.
And this isn't Oz or Wonderland. This is the afterlife. But Layla says, I'm only 13. I refuse to be dead. So along with her grandfather and her cat and a character called the Not Quite Fallen Angel, they're going to try to get Layla back as they journey through the lands of after, try to get her back before this window of opportunity closes. Will she get back? Won't she? Read and find out. Actually, you won't find out in the first issue. So, but you'll get a lot of other fun stuff in there. And I call it the lands of after because my concept is that that the afterlife is composed of mind and imagination. So everyone gets the afterlife that they expect. Every spiritual tradition, or if you don't have a spiritual tradition, everyone has a conception of what's on the other side. And that's exactly when you create what you create when you get there. And then other lands beyond that. So they're traveling through multiple landscapes as they go on this journey to try to get her home.
I think there's a bit of I think that sounds a bit moon shadowy.
Yeah, a bit, maybe. Maybe it's also got, well, so did Moonshadow. I guess it has some whimsy to it, but it's also got some, some gravitas to it as well. It's that combination. And also, I envision this one, because it's got that magical land motif, as sort of an all ages thing. When I say all ages, I don't mean kids comic. I mean something that a parent can sit down and read with their child, and the parent can enjoy it. When I was reading these books with, when I was reading books with my kids when they were growing up, whether it was Oz or Narnia or whatever it was, I loved it as much as they did, and we each got something different out of it.
Okay,
so I'm hoping that this is the way that this one plays out.
Yeah, you can't do that with Moonshadow.
No, you absolutely can't. You get in trouble. By the way, Dark Horse put out a wonderful new edition of Moonshadow, beautiful hardcover in 2019. The most beautiful edition of that book ever, and we're going to be reprinting that in an even more special way coming up next year. So,
wow,
I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. So let's move on to the other ones. So I'll get through these so you can ask me any other questions you want to ask me. The next one is called Wisdom. That's the Tom Mandrake one with an alternate cover by Dustin Yen. And every time I say his name, I'm afraid I'm saying it wrong, which is I guess a karmic payback for all the people that say my name wrong. I don't know why am I getting the karmic payback for that?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Anyway, it's a supernatural Western. My one-liner on this one is Deadwood meets the Lord of the Rings. So on one level, it's a very sort of gritty, realistic Western. On the other, it's a big, big, epic fantasy about one man who makes this journey from being a pampered son of a rich businessman in upstate New York. The father dies, his business collapses. The son and his wife, he has dreams of being an actor. The problem is he's a terrible actor. Long story short, they move west in the days of the West, when it was really the West. And tragedy happens when his house burns down. He finds his house on fire. His wife and infant are inside, and he sees these shadowy riders riding away, ghostly riders. We don't know where they came. Not Ghost Rider, ghostly riders. Anyway, this begins a series of events that turn him first into a savage, wanted killer, and then ultimately a sorcerer tasked with protecting the world from this great darkness that's coming. And along with protecting the world, he discovers that his wife and child are still alive and they've been taken by this darkness. And he has to get them back and hopefully redeem them while he's saving the world. And, Tom Mandrake, fantastic work on the supernatural. Who does supernatural better than Tom Mandrake? And he does Westerns like nobody's business, And I should back up, same thing for Sean. I mean, Sean McManus worked with Neil Gaiman on Sandman, with Alan Moore on Swamp Thing. He and I did 2 years of Dr. Fate together. His ability to visualize and create a completely new fantasy world is just off the charts, So again, who's my favorite artist? Every one of these guys, I look at, when the art comes through, when I get an email and there's like new art pages there, that's the best part of making comics. That's when I feel like I'm 10 years old on my living room floor, opening a comic, turning the pages, and my mind just expands and then explodes,
Do the artists ever ring you up and say, I've got your stuff here, JM, but can you just explain it? Can you help me a bit? Do they ever do that, or do they just sort of take?
Sometimes, I've worked with certain artists who are not that the others don't think about the story. They're clearly thinking about the story, but I've worked with a few guys who think about it almost more than I do.
Yeah.
I worked with Michael Zulli a bunch, and Michael used to call me up. We worked on a series. He did an arc for a series, a Vertigo series called Seekers into the Mystery. Mm-hmm. And he would call me up and we'd be on the phone for an hour having these profound philosophical conversations because he really wanted to understand what I was getting at. Years ago, the late Seth Fisher, we did a graphic novel for DC called Will World. And he too, he wanted to understand everything I was thinking and feeling and what were the philosophical underpinnings of this and that. And the truth is, sometimes when I'm in the act of creation, I don't know, because my process is getting myself out of the way and opening up that little door in the back of my head that leads to my unconscious and letting it come out, and then later you go, oh, look at that theme. Look what that was about. I forget what story. I was thinking about some story of mine. All right, because we announced Kent Williams the other day as one of our alternate covers, and Kent and I did a series for a Vertigo series called Blood a Tale years ago, and I started thinking about it, and suddenly I went like this. I only did it in 1980. The original version was for Epic in 1987, and the other day I went, oh, that's what that was about. I just realized, you know what I mean? What in my life impacted a certain part of that story, and in all these years I had never realized it. So the stories continue to unfold through the years, you know. So anyway, that's the general gist of Wisdom.
Yep.
The next one is Any Man, which is on the surface, at least, the most traditional. It feels like a traditional superhero on the surface. The artist for that is a guy named David Baldion. We just did a series for Marvel recently called Ben Reilly Spider-Man, and just another fantastic artist with the ability to do all the big action you need in a superhero story, but all the quiet, intimate, emotional moments that you want. Oh, wait, I'm just looking at this question. I was recently told I need to be a lot more specific. Oh, yeah, I am very specific. If you look at my plots, first of all, I work in both. Two of these projects were done full script. 2 of them were done plot first. But my plots are incredibly detailed, page by page, panel by panel, camera angles, the whole thing. But I often say to the artist, look, I write it this way because this is how I see it. If you see a different way, if you think there's a better way to tell this visually, go ahead, as long as you are not violating the essence of my story, you know? But I have to write it that way because I see it in a very, very specific way. So yeah, you really need to be clear because, you know, especially like what I've seen happen, and I see we're getting sidebarred, but that's okay. You know, I've had situations where the story goes off to an artist in South America who doesn't speak English, and it gets translated by somebody else, you know? And, and as it goes through the chain, the descriptions break down and I get something back that I didn't expect. And sometimes just, you know, I think something's clear in a script and the way the artist reads it is something different. And sometimes it's my fault. I wasn't clear enough. And sometimes they're just reading it a different way. So be as clear as possible with your writing. Be as, you know, it's a visual meeting. You have to think visually and you have to put that visual quality on the page. Because if you can't write visually, then this is just, you know, the same way if an artist can't tell a story, even if he's a great artist, it's not the medium for him. If a writer can't think visually, if you can't see those visions in your head and get them on paper, then it's the wrong business for you, you know? So anyway, back to Any Man, now that I digressed. So Any Man is a big story. It takes place over the course of about 50 years. It starts in 1969 in New York City. A portal opens in Times Square and this costume figure comes through, who says that he is literally from millions of years in the past. He is the lone survivor of a utopian civilization, a perfect golden age. But his people, they reached too high. Their hubris was too great, and they brought this entire civilization crashing down on them. He has now come to our civilization at the end of the 60s, which he says, this is your crisis point, and I am here to prevent the same thing that happened to my people from happening to you. The world welcomes him. They name him Any Man. He's a global hero looked up to in every corner of the globe. The only problem is that entire story that he's told us is a complete fabrication. He's lying. So the question becomes, who is he? Why is he here? Who created him? What's the agenda? And that's just the first twist. And there's a twist under that and a twist under that. And that's Any Man.
That sounds good.
Sounds interesting.
And the last one, what is the last one? Oh, Godsend. Okay. The great thing about this title is I call it Godsend, and the artist Matthew Dow Smith, he reads it as God's End. And I realized after the fact that both titles actually apply to this story.
Both work.
Yeah. And so I was unconsciously brilliant without realizing it.
Are you familiar with the old TV series with Skeet Ulrich called Miracles?
What's it called?
Miracles with
No.
Skeet Ulrich. It only went for like, I think it was 2 half seasons. But the premise to that was when people had visions, some saw God is now here, and other ones had it crammed together and it said God is nowhere.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I love things that have that double meaning. You know,
Brilliant.
That's fantastic.
Like that.
And now I have to dig that show up. Is that streaming anywhere?
Not that I know of. I've got the DVDs of it, but it's a brilliant show that just got pushed by the wayside. But it's all metaphysics and things like that.
Oh, that sounds like I would love it. Yeah,
Which we're going to come back to. I'm not stealing Mark's question, but keep this.
Okay. So Godsend. Once we're done with Godsend, we can talk about anything you guys want to talk about. So Godsend, the main character, his name is Eric Small. He's in his mid-late 30s. He's a depressed, overweight, very sad character. He teaches junior high school. What could be worse than teaching junior high school? If you remember what junior high school is like, my poor teachers in junior high school, God. And he had a very, very painful, dysfunctional childhood. He's got like one friend. He's got a woman at school that he's crazy about and can hardly move his mouth to talk to her. Into his life and into this world drops this blue-skinned celestial figure. My one-liner on this is Kirby Gods meets The Matrix meets Philip K. Dick. So so he becomes not just Eric, but many people become obsessed with this figure that the media calls Godsend. He seems to be a force for good in the world, but no one really knows. He could be here. He's a godlike being. He could be here to destroy us. We don't know. But Eric feels like there's something there that he needs to know, that he needs to understand, that almost Godsend has the answer to a question that he can't even articulate, but it's like the most important question in his life. And one day he's in his living room and this being appears, 7 feet tall, with the body of a turtle and the head of a man. And he says to Eric, "Get on my back." And Eric is like, "Well, I guess if a giant turtle asks me to get on his back, I'd better do it." He gets on this turtle's back. The turtle moves through the wall, flies him out into the night. And this begins a series of events that shreds Eric's sense of personal identity and shreds his sense of reality itself. I love stories that are about who we think we are versus who we really are. What we take reality to be versus what may lie under the skin of reality, So that's what Godsend, that's the start of Godsend, but it's another very, very, very big story. I envision this in my head as 3 5-issue miniseries, and I've got literally dozens of characters waiting to spring up out of this story as it goes along. And the art is by Matthew Dow Smith, a wonderful artist. We've done a couple of shorter stories together. We did a wonderful Star Trek story together and a Batman story, but this is the first time we've been able to do a big story together. And Matt is great. He's really good with mood and shadow, and he's fantastic with people, with emotions, with facial expressions, with the right gesture. Talking about storytelling, the right gesture at the right time. So like right now, I'm talking about Godsend. Well, this must be the best one, except the other 3 are also the best ones. So I still can't figure it out.
They all sound pretty good to me.
They're all
and the 5th bonus one, which I forgot about too, is called the Edward Gloom Mysteries, art by Vasilis Godzilis. And this gets my Universal Monster movie jam out, And the main character is Edward Gloom. He's a monster cobbled together from the parts of a dozen different dead people, except long before this, Edward escaped from his creator, who is this mad woman. And he is not a monster. He is the most sensitive, brilliant soul you'd ever meet. He lives in his little underground home with his girlfriend, who happens to be a ghost, and a few other folks. And he writes symphonies, and he writes novels, and he writes books of philosophy and history and mathematics. And he sends them all out into the world under assumed names because he's afraid to go out in the world. So he's this shy, brilliant genius who also happens to be a grotesque monster. And what happens is he believed that his creator died some years before in a fire when he escaped her clutches. And we begin to see signs that she is indeed alive, and she's come to sow chaos across his city. So Edward and his team have to leave their little underground cocoon and go out in the world and do their best to stop her. So that's the premise of that one.
Interesting. I take it she's got an army of new monsters she's made as well, probably.
Exactly. Oh, there's a lot of monsters in this book. Yeah, the first issue, there's a symphony hall. I don't want to give too much away, but there's a symphony hall, and outside it's raining. But in every raindrop is a creature. When the raindrop hits the ground, these creatures grow, and by the time it's done, Symphony Hall is just a smoking crater. So there's lots of, it's got a very Vass's art in this has a very sort of Bernie Wrightson, Mike Plug feeling to it, which you need for something like this.
Gee.
You know, we specifically with the coloring, I said, let's look at the old Ween Wrightson Swamp Thing. Let's go for that tone in the coloring, you know? So my one-liner on this one is sort of Frankenstein meets Sherlock Holmes as written by Charles Dickens. So, because it's got a very Victorian feeling too, you know.
Well, the name, you know, calling somebody Gloom is very Dickensian.
Yes, exactly. So now that's it. I'm done with the hype. Anyone out there who hasn't come along with us yet, we have till noon tomorrow. Please come along. It's really great stuff. I'm very proud of all these books, and you may ask what you'd like.
Okay, that turtle man, is that from Indian? One of the Indian gods. A turtle is an aspect of him, isn't it? Is it?
Yeah, in Hinduism, yeah. There's the turtle. The world rests on the back of this giant turtle. Yeah, and the turtle imagery runs through a lot of different mythologies, but specifically, I picked it up from Hindu mythology.
Did you do when you was doing your Dr. Fate? That was about Kali Yuga, wasn't it? Kali Yuga, was that your?
Yeah, we were dealing a lot with the concept of the Kali Yuga. Yeah,
yeah, that's what I learned. I learned that from reading that Dr. Fate.
Realized, oh, good. Yeah, I did my job.
I still remember it.
Yeah. You made us all
great.
smarter, whether you wanted to or not. We're all smarter.
And I'm not that smart. I don't know how I did it.
We've got a question here, while people are thinking about it. Someone's asking about. Did you have any other storylines that you wanted to explore with Ghost Rider? He's asking.
Oh, okay.
Or if you knew it was over and felt.
Yeah, well, you know, the great thing about Ghost Rider, that was also very early in my career at Marvel, is that we had advance warning. The book was going to be canceled, and they gave us enough advance warning. I worked on that with Bob Budiansky. It's the first time I worked on a book with an artist who was actively co-plotting the book with me. So we used to get on the phone and talk for an hour and a half, and I'd go off and write the plot, and he'd draw it, and it was a great collaboration. But they warned us, you know, months in advance that the book was going to be canceled. The joke is, if any book has those sales today, it'd be a bestseller. You know, at Marvel in the 80s, if a book dipped below 100,000, it was like 90,000. It's like, I'll cancel that book. You know, now if you're selling 90,000, you're doing dances in the street, you know? So no, there were no more stories to tell because we really got to complete the story. And it's a very rare thing. I also got to do that with Dr. Fate, you know, because the great thing with Dr. Fate was I got to completely remake that character. It wasn't the Dr. Fate that existed before I got there. And then at the end, after Sean and I did, you know, first Keith Giffen and I did a 4-issue mini, and Sean and I did 2 years. And at the end of those 2 years, we completed the story and those characters left the stage. So and, you know, with mainstream comic books that go month after month after month, it's very rare that you get to tell a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and end. And with Ghost Rider and Dr. Fate, we got to do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's good. Most of the time, they just finish in the middle of a story nowadays, don't they? Quite a lot of
right.
You know,
and you know, it's the nature of the beast that those characters have to keep going and going and going and going. You know, no matter how much I may want to send Bruce Wayne to therapy and have him hang up his Batman costume, it ain't going to work. He's got to be there next month fighting the bad guys.
So JM, so one of the stories you're talking about is about the afterlife. And I can see on your shelves behind you various religious iconography.
You are correct.
So are you a follower of one particular religion, or are you interested in all religions?
I don't follow any particular religion. I was actually raised in both a Jewish and Catholic tradition. One parent was Catholic, one parent was Jewish. But I would call myself spiritual and not religious. I have a spiritual master, an Indian spiritual master named Avatar Meher Baba, who I have been with since I'm 19 years old.
Wow.
But it's a very, very broad tent there, you know. So you look behind me and you'll see Christian imagery and Hindu imagery, and because my personal experience, and certainly Meher Baba's point of view, is that when you get to the core of all these things, they're one thing. You know, different flavors on the outside. But when you get to the core, it's the same essence and the same truth, no matter how hard some people try to keep them separate, you know, and make them fight between each other. The mystical core of all these traditions and paths and religions is the same. And that's been, you know, sort of what's guided my life all these years. Yeah.
I believe that too. Yeah.
I lean over, there's a Kiddushan right there. the mystical kiddish on
All right.
one side,
wow.
the Tao Te Ching on the other side. All
That's
my
good.
dog tags from the Marine Corps said Taoist and Zen Buddhist. That was funny.
Oh, really? Oh, that's fantastic. Wow.
I've got another
Wow.
question. What's this? How do you determine where your research ends within scripts and the artist's research begins?
You know, I try to include as much as I can. You know, in the age of the internet, research is a very deep rabbit hole. You know, and
Yeah.
you can end up someplace that has nothing to do with your story by the time you're done. You know, something like Wisdom, where I'm researching the Old West, you know, and you know, oh, that, and then that, go over here to read it, then down here, then over here, you know. But the great thing is you can find all the visual reference that you want and need, even, you know, even for comics, you know, very often you can, you know, even if it's a 20-year-old story, you can probably find that image on the internet somewhere. So research is a lot of fun. And then the artists are going to do their own research, because no matter how much I may describe something, like I know like Tom Mandrake was very, very clear about, you know, the look of the Old West based on his own research. You know, I sent him a lot of stuff to go with it, and he had his own research, and you put that together and you create a world. But research, you know, research in the days of actually having to traipse to the library and look up old things on microfilm and that kind of stuff, not as much fun. You know, buying a book and reading about something, that was always fun. But the internet just opens that door. It's almost like you're going through a time portal or into another dimension. And the next thing you know, it's 2 hours later and you've got all this stuff. But you also don't want, how do I put this? You don't want the truth to impinge on a good story. So if you have to bend, if you want to have to bend history a little bit, you know, to enrich your story, that's okay too, because we're not writing history, we're writing historical fiction.
There you go. Yeah, I can never give up the library. I still call my man cave my library. You can only see 3 or 4.
Oh! I'm not talking about library at home. I have books all over my house. So I
wish that we still had 10 libraries around here. I'd still prefer that over the internet, even though the internet, if I want to know something, punch 2 buttons and there it is right there at my fingertips. But I still would rather flip through an old book and lose day. But then life doesn't let you lose days anymore. So
yeah, if you know, I past few years I've been reading more and more ebooks. Not the least of which because I'm really mold sensitive. So if I want to read some old book of mine that I love that's been sitting on the shelf for 20 years, I get to page 10 and I'm breaking out in hives, you know. So it's like, I'll read the ebook, you know. But at the same time, sometimes I read a new book and I read it as an ebook and I love it. And it's like, I have to have the book. I have to have the tactile sensation now of holding that in my hand and putting it on my shelf. Because we all know the magic, sometimes just looking at your shelf. Forget even taking the books out. Just looking at all this stuff, you know, there's something very magical about that. That's like the difference between a physical comic book and a digital comic book. Well, there are a lot of advantages to digital comics. But if you grew up in a world, like I always go back to that feeling, laying on a living room floor, paging through a comic. Or if I go, I have a closet full of my old comics and some of the old comics I've kept over the years, and that smell of the paper, that whole sensory interaction between you and the book is a really special thing.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about Moonshadow, which is
absolutely
one of my favorites.
One of mine too.
I can imagine.
No, seriously, if there are 2 or 3 projects of mine that, you know, I love so many things that I've worked on, but there are 2 or 3 that are so very special to me, and Moonshadow was one of them. Yeah,
I know it was a personal project of yours, and I heard the story about how you had it as a personal project, and Karen Berger said come to DC and we'll do it, and Jim Shooter said stay here, we'll do it for you as well. Did you have the artist in mind beforehand who you wanted to use, or
no?
Did you find the artist once Jim Shooter had said we're going to do it?
Yeah, you know, it's funny that you've heard that Karen story, because what I remember, she didn't even remember, is that she said there's this new British artist, Dave Gibbons. He'd be great for this. So I always think in some parallel universe there's a version of Moonshadow by me and Dave Gibbons. You know, that's again talking about the chemistry between writer and artist. That is completely different. You know, my original vision of Moonshadow in my head was a little sharper edges, a little more satirical, a little more Vonnegut almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A little more Sirens of Titan.
Okay.
I told you guys Vonnegut would come up.
and so when I decided to stay at Marvel, and I went got passed over to Archie Goodwin at Epic Comics, and so I was sharing the outline for Moonshadow with my friend Dan Green, who's a wonderful artist, an inker and a painter. And I had this thought in the back of my head, one of these in my area, especially in those days, there were a lot of artists that lived around here. I said, one of these guys that Dan knows is going to see this and want to get me involved with this. John J. Muth knows Dan, sees the Moonshadow outline, and the next thing you know, John and I get together, and this is the beauty of it. And I've said this many times before. These stories have their own lives, their own needs. I think I'm in control. I'm not. And that story was looking for and waiting for John J. Muth to come along because he was the guy that had to bring it to life. And I still remember sitting in my living room the first time we met. He had read the thing. He did some sketches. And I said, oh, well, this is very Dickensian. He said, well, that's what you wrote. And I went, ooh, you know what? You're right. I hadn't even realized that I was structuring this whole it was a Dickensian space opera, and he understood it better than I did, and so his art inspired me in the tone of the writing. My writing inspired him to do things in his art that he had never done before. And the chemistry between the two just built, and it was a special project because we lived nearby each other. A lot of times it goes off in the mail, in the days when where you send things in the mail or in the email now, but to work with an artist that each other, you live near each other. We would get together in a coffee shop. I'd bring my outline. He would be doing layouts on napkins in the coffee shop. That kind of, that kind of back and forth that was going on.
Oh,
and that's how
fly on that wall or have one.
How we created Moonshadow. Yeah. It was the same thing when I did Blooded Tale with Kent Williams. Kent and I literally lived next door to each other in the same little upstate New York apartment complex. So I could literally walk out my door and be at Kent's house in a minute. And we'd be running back and forth. Kent, I had this idea. Oh, look at this painting I just did. And back and forth and back and forth. And what an amazing, exhilarating, intoxicating way to create, Yeah. With the right collaborator.
I'd arm to have been a fly on the wall and to have some of those napkins. I literally would give my...
Those napkins are long gone.
Oh, my God.
Right. So the next question I have about Moonshadow is, was Ira based on a real person? And where does he get all his cigars from?
Ira the character was not really based on a real person, but I had a very close friend named Ira. And I just thought it was a hilarious idea to name an alien Ira. You know what I mean? It just seemed like the last name an alien would have. And so I remember someone else I knew who said, God, before I had read Moonshadow, before he ever met Ira, he said, I was afraid to meet him because of that guy in the comic. It's not the same guy. Don't worry. But I did name him after my friend Ira.
Okay. I'll bet he was really pleased.
Now to have a comic where Ira meets Slarty Bart Best. So.
I mean, Ira's sort of like a combination of animal from the Muppets, Chewbacca, and Gremlin. I mean, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, and a little bit of, I don't know if you remember the Addams Family, Cousin It, who was this
guy also. Yeah.
It's like an amalgam of all those furry guys, Yeah. Moonshadow was great because every once in a while you get the opportunity, and again, it wasn't conscious, but I created a structure for myself. And I'm going to back this up a minute. I read something years ago. I've tried to track down this quote for years. I can't find whoever said it, so I'm taking credit for it because I've changed it so much over the years anyway. But if anyone finds the real one, I'll happily give it back. It said something to the effect of whatever story you're working on in the moment, pour everything you are, everything you think, everything you feel, all your philosophy, all the themes that obsess you, pour it all into that story as if it's the only story you will ever write. And that's what I did with Moonshadow.
Yeah.
Everything I'd ever read, everything I'd ever lived, all came out through the filter of my consciousness and poured into that imaginary world that we created.
I mean, there's loads of literary stuff in there. The first issue starts with Blake.
That does sound like something Vonnegut would say.
So yeah, okay. And the final question about Moonshadow is the IHOT, International House of Tart, hugely ahead of its time. You were the first person to use the IHOT. You know, you should have sort of.
Why have other people done it?
No, but I think you used the, you know, before iPad, you had iHot.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, it came from the International House of Pancakes, is where it came from, and we just made it the International House of Tarts, which I thought was very funny. That was the other funny thing about Moonshadow too, because some people, you know, oh, that was such a serious piece, and some of it was, but some of it was just absurdist, you know, and that's what I loved about it. It gave me the room to do both. To take 3 pages and ponder some deep philosophical concept, and then turn around and do the silliest thing I could think of on the next 3 pages.
And how long had you been developing that in your mind before you?
That's a good question. For some years before that, I mean, I think I started playing with that idea before I ever worked in comics.
Yeah.
You know, in my head originally, it was much more of a standard kind of comic book sci-fi fantasy thing. It was originally called Stardust, I think.
Yeah.
And then I just continued to, and in fact, if you look at the Dark Horse edition, I think I have the notes from when it was originally Stardust, when I was like, whatever, 19 years old or 20 years old or something. And then it just, as stories do, it evolves until it finds the right venue and the right collaborator. And then it springs out into the world and surprises the hell out of you. And that series, every issue was a discovery for me. Mm-hmm. Because as I've said before, you know, I was at that point, I'm writing comics, I'm writing Marvel comics, you know, and there's a certain mindset that goes with that. Not necessarily from the people you're working for, but in my own head, I'd created this like this is what a comic book is. And by stepping outside of that and working on Moonshadow, I was free. And I sat down and I wrote that the same way I would write a novel, with no preconceived notions about anything, and just went with it, you know. And being lucky enough to have an artist like John J. Muth, I mean, it was just.
And when you then did the Vertigo 10 years later, John did a whole new set of covers, yeah?
Yes, he did a whole new set of covers, and then we did the sequel, Farewell Moonshadow. Yeah. And the idea with that was, you know, I had an idea for a sequel, but we didn't want to do it the same way. We didn't want to tell the story in the same way. We wanted to challenge ourselves. So I essentially wrote a prose piece, interrupted by, I think, 4 or 5 pieces that were just pure comics, visuals with no dialogue. And I wrote the prose piece, and then John would do a full page illustration to go with the page. And I wrote it page by page. So a page of prose, and John would do an illustration, page of prose. And I still think some of the best writing I've ever done, just in terms of the chiseled prose, you know, is Farewell Moonshadow. I read that sometimes. I read some of my old stuff and I go, oh my God, who wrote that? And then sometimes I read something like Farewell Moonshadow and go, oh my God, who wrote that? You know what I mean? It's like that's pretty good, and I'm always shocked. That's really great. I can't believe it, you know.
Have you got anything that you wrote in the past that you wish could be like stricken from the books forevermore?
Yeah, I'm sure there are a few things out there that I would like to, but I learned a very important lesson, and I was taught this by the fans, especially at conventions, because I have certain books in my head where I go, oh God, I hope, you know, why, like they announced some collected edition and there's some stories in there that's, oh God, why is that collected, you know? And then someone comes up to me at a convention and says, this is the first comic I ever read. It means the world to me. So I make sure never to knock my work, or I may forget sometimes, but 99% of the time, I try not to knock my work, because that story I might not like might be someone else's favorite comic book. And like I said, once the story is released into the wild, it's not mine anymore.
Hands down in my book.
That's so interesting.
Someone's asked if you were influenced by underground comics at all.
Not wildly influenced, but there was a period when I was in high school where I really, really got into Zap comics, and especially R. Crumb. I had a very, very heavy R. Crumb phase, you know. One of my favorite comic book stories of all time. One of my favorite stories of all time is a Crumb story. It's like a 3-page short called Meatball. Any of you guys are familiar with this?
If you showed it to me, I probably would recognize
It's called, you can look it up online. I think the whole story is out there somewhere. And it's ridiculous, but it's profound. It's about these meatballs that start falling out of the sky. And if you get hit in the head with this meatball, you get enlightenment, you know? And when I was 17, I just thought this was the greatest story I'd ever read, you know? But Crumb is amazing. I really loved Crumb back in the day.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
He had some interesting ideas of women, didn't he?
Yeah. And those guys, you know, did the same thing. Well, here's what a comic book is. No, it isn't. You know, here's the dynamite. Let's light it and blow it up. Same thing as Steve Gerber did. That's one of the reasons why I love Steve Gerber. His work at Marvel in the 70s. It's like he came, he looked at all the great work that came before him. He bowed to it respectively, and he took out his dynamite and lit it and blew it all up. You know?
Yeah. Steve Gerber was great.
And it said to me as a reader,
yeah,
it said to me as a reader, wow, this can be anything. Comics can be so much more. You know, we can just keep expanding and expanding and expanding.
A million miles an hour, or are we going to break into an Eric Idle song here?
That's right.
Comic book question. I got a comic book question, and it's, you talk about your symbiotic relationship with Giffen, who calls you DeMatteis, and whatever the backstory is, that cracks me up. But Justice League, the one punch. Who do we blame? Who gets credit for the one punch? I'm a Marvel guy, and that still sticks with me to this day.
That was right there in Keith's plot. So I have to give, you know, my job was to write the dialogue and goose it, you know, and move it along there. But that, you know, the one punch came out of Keith's fevered brain, and that has lived on for all these years, you know?
Yeah, it has. Yeah,
it's like one of these moments.
Everybody appears to have gone other than me. Or maybe it's just me that's gone and the others are all.
We can hear you.
We can hear you, but you're frozen.
Mark?
Yeah,
surreal.
We can hear you.
You're frozen, but we can hear you.
Maybe I'm going to become.
There you go. There. Well, now you're moving slower, but you're there.
You're moving like this.
Can you hear us, Mark?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yes, I'm the only person that stayed on.
2 marks. No, we're still here.
We're all still
We're
here.
all here.
Kind of flipping through.
Or was it just me that disappeared?
Yeah. You don't seem to be moving either. I'm not sure if you're on the same sync with us. You seem to pop out and come back again.
No, you're okay now. You're okay now.
All
Yeah.
Right.
But one day, and obviously this isn't the day, one day, I want to sit down with you, have you sign this, scribble all over it, whatever you feel like, while I take you around Indianapolis and to all the Vonnegut haunts. We can have some coffee. But one day, and like I said, you can watch a snippet on this show from a few weeks ago where I talked about the impact this had on me. If you're ever curious,
let's turn the question on you, and you don't have to explain everything, but just in a short bite, what is it about that story that got you?
Couldn't do it in a short bite. I could desperately try to do this in a short bite, but I'm a teenage kid. And of course, the hero of the moment is Kyle Richmond. My name is Kyle. I gravitate a little towards that. I like the Defenders because they're quirky. But here's all this big muscle trying to get through this heady stuff. I'm 13 and I'm reading about eternity parsing itself off to understand humanity. And I'm getting into it. And I'm a snot-nosed, wet behind the ears kid. And I understood that. So I'm like, oh, man. I mean, you know, you got the cover going in and all these big guys and this big concept of eternity and everything that goes with that. And all these superhumans who are just utterly powerless against something so grand. And the one guy who doesn't even have his powers at the moment appeals to the humanity of the moment and saves the world.
That was a lot briefer than you told us the other day. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm going to have to reread that story.
That was mind-bending to a kid. And all
I can see,
later, there's no gray area. Somebody asked my favorite comic. Beginning, middle, and end. It's right here.
That's fantastic.
It's still that good.
We've got a question from someone in the chat as well about Teen Titans Go.
Oh, I did. I think I wrote 2 or 3 episodes of Teen Titans Go. Yeah, I've done tons of animation over the years. I did I think 3 episodes in Teen Titans Go.
Your resume is wow.
Is all your focus now going to be on the multiverse? Or have you got any other projects that we're only like in the big two or anything like that you're working on?
Oh yeah, well, just today, Spider-Man: The Lost Hunt came out from Marvel, which is sort of a sequel. That's a prequel to Craven's Last Hunt. It's both a sequel and a prequel. That's an interesting thing because it jumps back and forth in time.
Okay.
And it's a really fun story. I don't want to give too much away, but the Ben Reilly series that I did took place in that 90s era. And this takes place at the same time. We're with Peter and Mary Jane in Portland. They're married. She's pregnant. Peter at that point in time had lost his powers. So it's a powerless Spider-Man. And this figure from his past, Gregor, who was Craven's right-hand man, shows up. He's been waiting for the right moment to get revenge because he blames Peter for the death of Sergei as well as Sergei's son Vladimir. So we have a powerless Peter against this tremendous threat, and we get to explore the idea of what makes a hero. Is it webs and sticking to walls, or is it who the person is? And then we introduce a third character who is connected to Craven's past, which opens the door to things about Craven's past that we've never heard before, that we never know before. So it's a really nice, like Craven, it almost feels, it's much more in some ways of a horror story than it is a superhero story. It's dark, it's kind of twisty and twisted, and it's a good story. We just lost him again.
Yeah, he's disappeared again.
He needs to pop out and pop back.
Yeah, that's what he should do, is pop out and pop in. And the other thing, I had a novella that just came out in June called The Excavator, which it's a supernatural thriller, a piece of prose that I'm very, very proud of, that you can get at Amazon either as an ebook or as a physical book. And I am right now, that's what I was working on today, working on a new novella that should be out next year, I hope, by the spring. Absolutely. So I'm going to continue to do prose, and I'm sure there's more animation in the future as well. So I like to mix it up. I like to do different things because it keeps me fresh.
Absolute renaissance.
There's no like one genre that like you love above all others.
One genre. That's interesting. I really do like playing with the supernatural. And I'm not talking about in-your-face horror. Like, I grew up on the Twilight Zone. I love that sort of, shadows and substance, that whole phrase. The idea that there is more. What we were talking about earlier in this here, that there's more to the world than what the surface level presents us. That as you peel away the skin of the world, there is magic, there are miracles, there are strange and wonderful things happening here. That the universe is a living, breathing thing that we interact with, and the more mystical stories, the more supernatural stories allow you to dive into that, and also to get more philosophical about it as well. That's why, I love the DC supernatural characters. I've written a lot of them. And a few years back, I was writing Phantom Stranger and Justice League Dark, and I was in heaven. Justice League Dark, you could pull in any supernatural character you wanted, any month, anytime, I love Doctor Strange at Marvel, So I do love those characters, but, I love this. I'm lucky in that I've worked in so many genres. I've done straight superhero stuff. I've done the funny stuff with Giffen. I've done autobiographical comics. I've done kid-friendly fantasy. I've done my own personal sort of metaphysical creator-owned comics. It's so, and not to mention, the TV and the movie stuff and the prose. So I consider myself very, very lucky that I've gotten
and the music. We've done the music.
Yeah,
so you got an album out.
You got the album.
I had an album out 20 years ago. Yeah, but it's still out there. But it's still out there on Spotify and Apple Music, or it's on YouTube. It's called How Many Lifetimes, and it's basically rock and roll that deals with these spiritual themes that we've been talking about. About my lifetime with Meher Baba and exploring these issues and these questions, and but within the same thing, you can't write a philosophical treatise. You have to write a story. If I'm just lecturing you about something that I believe, that's, then I'll go write a philosophy book. I want to tell a good story about interesting characters. Same thing with music. Whatever the theme is, you want it to be engaging, and you want it to touch your mind and touch your heart. And I have to say, of all the creative things I've done in my life, that album is one of the most profoundly satisfying things I've ever done. And I've got like, stacks of songs that I've been waiting all these years to get back into the studio and finally record them. When I get back into the studio, it's going to have to be a double album, and that still won't cover all the songs that I have.
I want a physical album of that. I definitely want a physical album of that. The second one, but even the first one. Tell me you got spare copies on the back burner.
Of the first one?
Of the first one.
Yes, I do. And
I'm bad. I'm first in line.
You just let me know, give me an address, and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I've got some members of Grateful Dead lined up who want to review it.
Well, you guys know everything.
Let's get in there.
let's not get. Several people have asked me about that story recently. Let's skip that one for today.
That's how you do about it.
It's all good. Wow.
Talking about the supernatural characters, I do think DC have got much better supernatural characters than Marvel.
I think they have a deeper bench. Yeah, they do. I mean, the flip side of that is Marvel has a lot of supernatural characters floating around. They just haven't been exploited in the same way that DC has done it. DC has done a great job with their supernatural characters. So I think you could probably do something similar with Marvel if they took the time. Actually, an artist and I, a couple of years ago, came up with a great framework for sort of, it's a funny thing, talking about the Defenders, those early days of the Defenders, that was Justice League Dark, because it was all the supernatural characters coming together as a team to face supernatural threats. And all those years later, I'm writing Justice League Dark, and I went, wait a minute, I think I created Justice League Dark in 1980. And now I lost the thread of what I was trying to say. Oh, yeah, so this artist and I came up with a great framework with a bunch of, a combination of some of the established Marvel characters and some new characters, and a great artist, and we pitched it, and they didn't want to do it. So maybe that's not the arena they want to explore so deeply. But did you guys watch Werewolf by Night, the little 1 hour special?
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was so much fun.
That's how to do it.
There's so many channels now. I can never find stuff. I haven't got channels to watch things on. It's all confusing.
Yeah. No, it was like, it took that classic Universal monster movie sensibility and had fun with it, and it really worked too. And to see Man-Thing come lumbering around, and that was just fantastic.
That was the best part.
Yeah. So I have about 10 more minutes, and then I have to run because it's dinner time around here.
Okay, can I just ask you another question? So you're obviously well read, and you've read a lot of the classical stuff. If you were born in a different era, who would you have been? Shakespeare, Dickens, H.P. Lovecraft?
That's really interesting.
Yes. I think the answer.
Well, it's a funny thing, because the Edward Gloom Mysteries is sort of it's sort of like Mary Shelley meets Charles Dickens. So I think I would have been around in Victorian London, writing in a very Dickensian style, but adding supernatural elements to the stories.
Okay, you may be Mary Shelley then.
Yeah, a bit of Mary Shelley and a little bit of Charles Dickens, and no one told a story like and Charles Dickens. Look at A Christmas Carol. I mean, that is one of the great supernatural tales.
You could have been Arthur Conan Doyle, maybe.
Yeah. Right, in the periodicals, like the monthly books they used to do, like Conan Doyle did. Yeah.
Well, right, and that's what that's how Dickens put out his work, right? Just like comics, people went every month and they bought the little pamphlet, and then they collected it together in a big book when he was done.
Yeah.
Here's a callback laugh for you. Pull my dog tags off the wall. I got to cover up the middle because it's got my social security number on it. But
I don't want to see that. Wow.
It's your religion, isn't it? Oh, Taoist. Okay.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And the other one, they would either put Taoist or Zen Buddhist, and they're like, "How can you be a pacifist?"
They probably wouldn't know what to do with you if something did happen to you. They probably wouldn't have known a clue what to do with you.
I can pull off the dichotomy of mankind.
We've got a few older questions. It's kind of like there might be a bit cookie cutter, but someone asked, "You got a proudest moment of your career at all?"
Let me think. All right, I don't know if it's the proudest moment, but one of my favorite moments was when I sold my first official comic book script to Paul Levitz at DC. I broke in back in the days of the anthology. You held up, Weird War Tales. And the one that you held up was my first published story, but it wasn't the first story I sold. I sold a story to House of Mystery. And, I'm just some working class kid from Brooklyn with dreams of being a writer, and spent months pitching stuff to Paul. And finally, I was up at the DC office and I pitched him a bunch more. He sent me home to write it, came back with the script, sent me home again to rewrite it, came back, went over it, shook my hand and said, "Welcome to the business."
Wow.
And that was, what a fantastic moment. What an amazing moment that was.
Did you frame your first check or did you spend it?
Funnily enough, the first check that I got was not really for a comic book. Technically, I sold something through a guy that I knew who worked at Marvel, who I knew from Brooklyn College. I sold a piece to Crazy Magazine. Do you remember Crazy Magazine?
Yeah.
That was the first thing I ever sold, and I got a check with Spider-Man's face on it. It was like, oh my God, But that didn't feel to me like I was in the comic book business yet. Not until I sold that story, a real, honest to God comic book story to Paul Levitz.
What was it like when you got the actual issue with your story in? What, you showing it to the whole family? And
yeah, and it's like, what am I showing to my family? House of Mystery and Weird War Tales, and they're probably thinking, what the hell is this? You know what I mean? That stuff was the vaudeville of comics. It's where you started at the bottom rung and where you learned your craft, because you got to write 5, 6, 8-page stories within a very, very tight structure. And it was a fantastic way to learn how to be a comic book writer. It's great.
So, JM, have you got a room somewhere in your house where you've got a copy of all the comics that you've written?
They're all right. But see those binders behind me? There's more of them than what you see. Every single comic that I've ever done is in those binders.
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
How often do you go back and have a browse through them? Or are they just literally there for...
Once in a while, more often if it's something that's reprinted and they send me the reprint and I go, okay. And then I'm either like this, or I'm like this, depending on the story.
Yeah.
There was 2 other questions that guy had.
There was, I was going to go back to them. If hardest obstacle you had to overcome for your career?
Well, just getting started, I always say, I teach writing classes sometimes, and I always say, no matter how successful a writer appears to you from the outside, the freelance life, the creative life in general, is always filled with rejection. You could be at the top of your game, and all of a sudden there's a downturn, and there's 6 months or a year where you're not getting any work anymore. And then all of a sudden the phone's ringing off the hook. The freelance life, it's like being on a high wire with wind blowing you back and forth. And you're trying the whole time to keep your balance. Or my other metaphor is it's like tap dancing on quicksand. You know what I mean? You have to tap dance really fast so you don't sink. And you have to tap dance really well so that editor over there goes, oh, look at the way he's dancing. Let's hire him, I've had guys, sometimes you have to remind people who you are, I have this whole body of work and then I do one random story for somebody. And so all of a sudden I get a call from a company that hasn't called me in 2 years. Like they're suddenly reminded that I exist, The freelance life is a very funny one. That's another reason why I've always, I'll do comics, I'll do animation, I'll do this, I'll do that. Because when that door closes over there, you always want to be able to jump through that door that's open over there. You have to always be on your toes as a freelancer. And I sometimes look back and I've said to my wife, how the hell have I done this for 40 years? Because it's, when it's going great, it's the greatest thing in the world. And other times it takes a real toll on your nervous system. Sure. But the reason I've been able to do it is just what we started talking about, just the joy of story, the joy of creation. And that's what keeps, every time I think I may be done, I'm laying in bed one morning and, it's a new story. Off we go again, And what was his third question? He had 3 questions.
His last question was, what character have you always wanted to write for?
I've written almost most of them, but and everyone who asks me this question gets the same answer because it's the answer, the real answer. I've always wanted to do Fantastic Four with Giffen and McGuire. Mm-hmm. I always thought that our sensibility applied to the Fantastic Four. I am a huge Kirby fanatic. I love Kirby. I love the 60s Fantastic Four stuff. And Fantastic Four was cosmic, but it also had a great sense of character and a great sense of humor. And I think our Giffen DeMatteis McGuire vibe would be great for the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, that would work for me.
Well, I'm kind of biased. Anybody ask me what you'd be good for, and I said everything. Name it, everything.
God bless you. God bless you.
Have you got a favorite character that you created? Your favorite creation?
Wow.
That you.
That's that same answer. It's like, so pick your favorite child. Well,
Yeah,
if I had to say,
yeah.
Moonshadow was certainly among them. I did a
Yeah.
series about, in the early 2000s with Mike Plug called The Bodazad. We did it for CrossGen.
Yeah, CrossGen. Beautiful.
And then we took it, and Disney bought us in our story, and we did it as a series of half prose, half comics books for younger readers. One of my favorite things that I've ever done. Just love that, and it was one of the most unfortunate things because basically we had planned 8 books. They canceled us after 3 for a variety of reasons that I don't need to get in here. And Disney owns it, and I can't get it back now. They paid us a good chunk of change for it because we thought we'd be going on with it for quite a long time, and then the whole thing collapsed. And that, again, there's the dangers of the freelance life. You never know. One minute you're walking on solid ground, the next minute you're in the quicksand. But I wouldn't take any of it back, not a moment of it, because it's been incredibly gratifying and continues to be incredibly gratifying. Watch how I do this as we move forward with the DeMultiverse and all these new projects for our Kickstarter that ends at noon tomorrow. So that was a good transition. That was a really good transition. I also want to add that the books will be on sale. If you missed the Kickstarter, the books will be on sale still at the Spellbound Comics website for a while after that. So
awesome.
All right. You have one last question for me?
I've got a song. If it plays, I've downloaded one of your songs before we can have a quick listen to it.
I've heard that voice somewhere.
Walking beside you.
Interesting.
Standing so near to your love.
There you go. That's a little taster. But
Now credits should be rolling over the music, right?
Yeah.
That song, by the way, just so you know, that song starts off. It's kind of like the song starts off quiet and acoustic and grows into this massive, massive thing by the time it's over.
Cool.
Anyway, so one last question before we go.
Go on. One last question, Kyle. Go on, you go. Last question.
Oh no, I'm just gratitude. There's no question. It's I owe you 40 years of gratitude for profoundly affecting my life in some way. And helping
and don't think for one moment that I take that for granted. Yeah. One of the great things about this business is because, and I know for myself as a fan, we're passionate about this stuff. And so when I have a conversation like this, when I go to a convention and someone comes to me and tells me this story or my work in general meant so much to them, I don't take it for granted. It makes an entire career worthwhile. It really does.
Yeah, I do a segment on this called Character Studies when we don't have guests, and that was absolutely my first choice. I'm like, how do you do the concept of eternity? And it's like, well, you look at it at the human level. And then my concept of character studies is I'm not studying the characters of the comics. I'm studying how the character of the comics affected my character as a human and comparing and contrast them where, I quote that book at least weekly or some variation of it 40 years after it came out. I carried some of the things I learned in that book through combat.
Wow.
I mean, it just, you can't just to fathom how it's all, because you said it, we're metaphysically linked to the whole things, but things I learned as a 13-year-old on, compassion with people. And I'm learning compassion as a kid, it teaches me to quit bullying, teaches me to look off to the side. Then I see the third world and I understand more compassion there and, bring those people home. And then the brain clicks and goes, where did you see this? Well, the acceptance of the X-Men, Defenders 92. I could actually draw a straight line from going through Kuwait and Iraq to reading the X-Men and reading the Defenders.
Wow.
And how that made me a better person. And then, I always strive to be a better person. Then I work with the developmentally disabled. Well, how can I apply these things to that? What did I learn from my mother and the influences in my life? And you're in there with them. You're actually in there with them.
Well,
And I appreciate that.
I thank you for sharing that with me so eloquently. It really means something to me. So thank you.
So my question, Jem, is when are we going to see you in the UK? I would love you to come across to a convention.
Yeah, you know, honest to God, the last time I went to a convention in England was, I think, 1989. Now I've been in England since then, you know, but
So
not for a convention.
We have a fantastic convention in England called Thought Bubble. Check it up. It's actually where creators go. So it's purely about artists and writers. And this year, it's happening this weekend for this year, but you should look for next year because they will definitely pay your airfare and get you across there.
I'll just get on. Let me drive to the airport right now. I'll come right over. Yeah, you know, it's funny. Since COVID hit, I have not gone to a single convention, and it's been,
Okay.
And they're very, you know, it's a lot of fun on a lot of levels. And these international conventions, you know, my wife comes with me. We've traveled all over the world, and you know, you meet these people all over the world that have read and appreciated the work, and it's really fantastic, you know. So I'm hoping that next year I can start dipping my toes back in that.
I'm going to talk to the organizers of Thought Bubble and get them to invite you for next year.
Well, that would be lovely. That would be lovely. Well, great. Well, guys, thank you. This is I really, really enjoyed this, and Kyle, especially, thank you for sharing what you shared. It means a lot to me.
Well, I'm gonna keep bugging you, so you know.
Send me your address, and I will send you a
I'll
CD.
do that, buddy.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice
My
dinner.
pleasure, guys. Yeah. Great talking to you all. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a great amazing day. I'll have a great amazing day. Have a great amazing day. I hope you have a great amazing day.